everyone. I'm James Milan, and this is Your Arlington Dollar. I am joined in the studio today by a guest who will be familiar to regular viewers of Your Arlington Dollar, and that is Allan Tosti, the chairman, longtime chairman of our finance committee here in town. Allan, thanks as always for joining us. And I was just realizing as I said that yeah, you're longtime chairman. I assume there's no end in sight?
We'll see.
We'll see. Okay.
They haven't kicked me out yet.
All right, good enough. And we are here to talk, you know, again, as I said, you're familiar to members of our audience, and particularly at this time of year where we often have a conversation with you about where things are at in terms of the budget cycle, what the Finance Committee's role is, et cetera. So if you wouldn't mind, let's just start with just a couple of minute refresher for folks or new information for those viewing for the first time about, again, those things, where we are in the budget process and what the role of the Finance Committee is, what you guys are up to at this time.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. I always enjoy it. Right now, the budget cycle starts in September, even before that, where the manager and superintendent puts out notices to the department heads. Through the fall, they get all the requests back in, and then the manager's job is to pull it all together, as the superintendent has to. The bylaws say that everything has to be to the manager by January 1st, and then the manager has to put together a balanced budget and submit it to the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen by January 15th. At the same time, the Long Range Planning Committee is meeting throughout the fall, taking a look at all of the numbers, seeing where the revenues are with the formulas that we've agreed to over the years, and how the distribution is going to be, primarily between the manager and the school department, and the other demands that take place on the budget that we have very little control over. Mm-hmm. So the Finance Committee gets the budget in mid-January. They divide up according to departments pre-assigned, and they start interviewing the department heads, meeting together, and then the Finance Committee, we started meeting last week. On the 11th, we went through the warrant, deciding which articles that we're going to hear because it has either an appropriation or a budget impact, and then which articles that we think, while that might have a small, minor financial impact on the town, is really more of a policy area. So the redevelopment board takes care of all the zoning articles. The selectmen are taking care of sort of the middle of the road, miscellaneous bylaw changes, things like that. And then the Finance Committee articles, or the last third of the warrant, we start reviewing those. The manager came before us in the second meeting, going through the Long Range Planning Committee, getting familiar with that, and then we start working. Mm-hmm. We voted on a number of budgets already. We've had several hearings. The Community Preservation Act Committee came before us last night, went through all those, and took a vote to support. And then we'll proceed that through the end of March. Mm-hmm.
And a couple of basic questions, and then I want to dig in a little bit deeper. One is, you'd mentioned that the town manager and the superintendent of schools are, you know, both kind of in charge of large departments. I know that the budget for the town generally is divided into town operations and school operations. What are the major areas of appropriation or you know, the places where a lot of money is spent in general outside of the school system that we're all aware of?
Well, there'll be certain areas which are what we might call fixed costs. Those include health insurance, which is a large part of the budget, and also includes pensions, which is a large part of the budget. Now, pensions are pretty well decided through an agreement between the retirement board and the town on how much that can grow each year, which is about 5.5%, to be fully funded, I think, in the late 30s. The Minuteman is obviously a big ticket item over which we do not have a great deal of control. Obviously, the debt service from that project is coming in now.
And just to remind people, excuse the interruption, but we're talking about Minuteman Vocational High School that we passed a debt exclusion in town a couple of years ago, increasing, you know, the tax burden here in town in order to build a new Minuteman.
That's correct. And that building should be opening in next September. They'll probably have open houses during July or maybe August for people to go out and see. And we're hoping that that will attract a lot more students into that school, which will help everybody. And so that, there are some other miscellaneous costs, MBTA assessments, things like that, that we have virtually no control over. Outside of those, you can go down through the town manager's budget. His biggest budget is public works, and then after that, probably public safety. And then it gets to much smaller items.
Sure. And obviously, I think people understand very well how important and fundamental to quality of life here in town the Department of Public Works and the Department of Public Safety, fire, police, et cetera, are.
That's right.
So very little controversy there. But part of why I was asking, I think, is because, we find ourselves at a particular point here in February of 2019 where I think people are increasingly aware in town of the fact that sometime this spring we're going to be certainly presented with a debt exclusion for the new high school that needs to be rebuilt. And then I don't know what the story is with the structural override. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your perspective is on that?
The debt exclusion for the high school is a given. We go through a long process with the state Massachusetts School Building Authority that we've been in for the last 2 years. The final plans, not the final plans, but pretty much have been done, been voted, the Mass School Building Authority. So the next step is it has to go, it goes before the Capital Budget Committee, the Finance Committee, and then to town meeting. So town meeting will need to authorize the bonds. That requires a 2/3 vote. So that'll be a major step. And then sometime in June, the Board of Selectmen will put a debt exclusion question on the ballot for the citizens to decide if they will finance the high school. So that's a huge project, and that's a very important project. The other thing is, the other issue is an operating override. We will need an operating override in the next 3 years. We have not had an operating override since, I think, 2011. So we've been able to put that off. It was supposed to be a 3-year override, and now it's almost been a 10-year override. So it's been very successful, together with some issues with health insurance or reforms in health insurance that has helped us a great deal. The other side of that is the increase in school population has been a killer. It has put extra stress on the school budget. We're talking, 200 students a year increase. So if you got 2 years, you're almost into a new school opening, if that was all in elementary. So that has put a lot of pressure on the budget, and we will need an operating override soon. That's being debated now. Obviously, it's a Herculean effort. The selectmen could decide to put the operating override at the same time as the debt exclusion. There's several advantages for that. Number one, we get it done once, so it's cheaper to have one election than to have two. It also it's a big effort as far as educating, informing the citizens, and doing that whole effort. So that's it for it. On the other hand, does the operating override jeopardize the high school? Having them both on the ballot at the same time, does that overwhelm the citizens, and they might have the risk of not only voting the override down, but voting the high school down? Voting the high school down, in my opinion, will be a disaster for the town, equivalent to the disaster we had back in the 1970s when the high school project then was voted down. So there's a lot of issues up in play.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that you alluded to slightly, but I wanted to highlight, is also the fact that a potential advantage to combining the two and taking our lumps in a big way soon is that the total cost to each household, to property owners, that rise in our property taxes is going to be significantly lower, as I understand it, if we do that override sooner rather than later. Every year that we wait, even if it is not absolutely necessary that we do it, every year we wait, that bill is going to go up and fairly significantly.
Yeah, that is true. The longer you put it off, the higher the amount, the higher the impact will be. So there's a lot of issues to be discussed, and I'm sure the Board of Selectmen will want input from all the citizens on how they see this going.
Well, speaking about input from the citizens, we've got a new approach that we are taking to Your Arlington Dollar and other public affairs shows. And that's going to include some interactive components. And in fact, we've got a question from a citizen that has weighed in has emailed us. And this question is from Liam, who says that he's on a fixed income here in town. And what is he supposed to do, given how daunting all of this sounds to someone? Again, as we know, one of the larger issues in town has to do with rising home prices and how hot our real estate market is.
Yep.
So folks, are paying higher rates in terms of assessments, and then also property taxes, as we just noted. So that's putting folks in a bind. Right. Liam is representative of those folks, and I guess wondering if you have any ideas about what he should do or could do.
Yeah, that's it's a very important consideration that has to be taken into account. It is a lot of money. Let's just take the high school. The estimate has been $800 per year increase in taxes for a house that's valued, I think it's $750,000. So obviously, now that $800 is probably a little less because the cost of the high school has been reduced from $308 down to about $290. So it's a small decrease to it. Obviously, if you have a place that's valued at $500,000, then the impact will be less. If you have a place that's valued at higher than that, the impact will be more. Now, there are certain exemptions that exist, and you could learn all these through the assessor's office. And the selectmen have put a couple of questions on the warrant. One of them that strikes is you can delay if you meet certain requirements, if your income is below a certain level. I'm not sure if there's a net worth valuation on that. You can apply to basically have your taxes deferred. You will have, so if you meet these requirements, you can have your taxes deferred. Obviously, there's a lien put on your property, and when you sell the property, then the taxes are collected at that point. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, maybe it was 1 year ago, the interest rate was dropped to a much more reasonable level. So that's one thing that the taxpayer can look into. Not many people use this, but it's a very valuable one for the people. You'll have to pay the taxes ultimately when the house is sold or condo is sold, but it is available for people.
Is that an age? Is there any kind of age requirement attached to that, or is it just an income requirement, more or less, or just anybody can apply?
Okay, I'm going from memory now. I think there is an age requirement. It's more, for seniors. Ability to defer, and a lot of people have not wanted to do it because a lien is put on their house, and they want to leave money for their children. But if they think about themselves and their ability to stay in town and their ability to afford, it is an option.
Yeah, and what again, just to make it perfectly clear what you mean by deferring your taxes, you're saying that you can not pay your yearly property taxes for some amount of time. That however much you're not paying will at some point when you sell your house be taken out of the proceeds from that sale.
So it's a delay on that, but it is an option, like I said, for seniors.
Okay.
And I think there's a couple of other exemptions that many people don't take advantage of, and they should check go online to the website for the town, go to the assessors, and they'll list exemptions. If you think your property has been assessed too high, you can challenge the valuations, and there's a process through the assessors. But I urge people to take a look at the exemptions that are available to them. There's exemptions for veterans, there's exemptions for people who are blind, that not many people take advantage of, and I think they should look at that.
Okay. And we've got another question coming in now.
Sure.
This one is from, just a minute, it's just coming through, and this is Bert. Bert is wondering, why don't we consider cutting back services or consolidating before asking for more money? So he's obviously referring to the override that we were talking about before. Why not, again, cut services rather than pay more?
Yeah. The town of Arlington expenditures for most services is actually below the state average. We are not a high spending community when you look at police, when you look at fire, when you look at public works and schools. The school spending is still below state average the last time I checked this out. Police and fire below state averages. So right now, I think most people who have examined the budget, and you can examine the budget, by the way. There's great tools on the town website where you can go in and you could look at the budgets. You can play what-if games. You could examine how they compare to state averages. There's a lot of tools there, but we're not a high-spending community for that. And so I think right now, most people on the Finance Committee examined it. I think there's not a lot of room to cut. And so if you're going to cut, you've got to look at whole services. But I think our police force and our fire department is pretty much at what we think is a safe minimum. The schools, with the constant increase in enrollment, they've got a lot of things they would like to do that they cannot afford to do right now. The library would love to expend their hours, but they can't. Mm-hmm. Most things that can pay for themselves, say like recreational programs, are paying for them. There's not a lot of money, town money, that goes into a lot of the recreation programs. So I think that at this point, we've cut as far as most people feel comfortable.
Okay. So Bert, you know, that's right from the mouth of the chairman of the Finance Committee, who, again, looks at this stuff, scrutinizes it quite closely year after year after year. And you're saying, my understanding is, hey, we're running pretty lean as it is. We're very efficient. And as far as you can tell, you know, all those services are necessary and running at the minimum that you feel comfortable with.
Yes.
All right. So time for one more question. And this time we will be hearing from, it is Ann who is checking in and wanting to know, how far could the override be pushed? You mentioned that it is not absolutely necessary at this moment. She's wondering how far off can it be pushed?
Well, one of the factors that sort of clouded that issue this year is in the governor's budget, he recommended an additional increase in state aid for Arlington, which is great news. The trouble is whether we can count on that. If all of that money comes in and it is used to reduce, not spent, but reduce the amount that we need to take out of reserves, right now with the scenario, we could stretch it out till 2023. Right now we're looking at 2020. So that's 3 years. If that money is we either don't get it, or we don't get as much of it, or we utilize it, for example, to help some add some state school programs, then 2 years. Mm-hmm. At 2 years, then we hit the cliff. Mm-hmm. So that was what we told the voters way back in 2011, that this was going to be 3 year, and we've managed through many efforts to push it out.
Let's dig into that a little bit more, actually,
Sure.
Because of course you've been part of your tenure as the chairman of the Finance Committee includes that whole period.
Yep.
What is it that accounts for the fact that, you know, again, we did a 3-year override in 2011, should have been before the voters again, at, you know, if things had progressed as expected at that time, should have been before us as voters in 2014, 2015. Here we are in 2019, talking about how probably we need to look at this now, possibly put it off another year or two. As you said, 3 years to 10 years. How does that happen?
Well, I think there's been several factors. The biggest factor has been after we passed the override back in, it was 2011, the state legislature passed a governor's proposal to change how municipalities fund health insurance, employee health insurance. The town of Arlington, literally the manager called the selectmen's meeting the day the governor signed the bill to accept it. It allowed us to enter the GIC, the Group Insurance Commission, which is how state employees are their insurance is funded. And we managed to save a large amount of money. Mm-hmm. Because of that, we've been able to, I'm trying to remember how much it was, but it was like $4 or $5 million. And we've managed to stretch that out because we've reduced a major increasing cost to the town, which is employee health insurance. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a major factor. I think a couple other major factors have been low inflation. Inflation has been kept in the 2% range for the last 10 years. That has helped dramatically. So, employee raises have been in the 2% range instead of the 5% range. So that's been also. Also, I think we've managed to stay within caps. The managers' budgets have stayed under 3.5%, 3.25%. The schools have managed to keep their general expenditures below 3.5%, and with a minor exception for special education. So all those factors have kept a 3-year override into a 10-year override. On the other side has been the dramatic increase in school enrollment. Mm-hmm. And that has put extra stress, and we've accommodated the schools with an extra increase in their budget because of the school enrollment. But that has still kept a lot of stress on the school budget.
Yeah, it's really, when you step back and think about it, a remarkable, truly remarkable achievement to be talking about a 3-year override that's extended that far, especially given what you were just saying, that it was wholly, well, if not wholly, mostly unanticipated that the explosion in the school population could happen at the rate it has been happening. Yeah.
And I think, also the local officials have been working together. The Board of Selectmen, the school committee, the finance committee, the superintendent, the manager, have all been working together steadily over the years as a team to control spending, to keep everything in line, and the town meeting has worked with that, rejecting extra increases in appropriations because it doesn't fit within the plan. So I think all of the main bodies of the town, especially including the town meeting, have recognized the importance of controlling spending and staying within the plan, and that's been a blessing. You don't see that in all cities and towns. Mm-hmm.
You were just referencing a number of the different actors in this whole situation, all of whom deserve credit again for the decisions they've made alone and also for the way that they act in concert. I think people would be interested to know. And you and I have talked about this before, but it's always worth reminding folks. How is it that they, as ordinary citizens and residents of Arlington, can either be involved in this whole process or make their voices heard, either directly to the Finance Committee or, more generally within the budget process in terms of, again, people just weighing in on what they think?
I think that all of the meetings of the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and the School Committee, they're all public. I think one thing they need to do is sort of gain greater knowledge about how the whole process works. One obvious way is to watch your TV shows.
Thank you.
Welcome.
We agree.
And I think they provide a tremendous amount of information. The other is to go to the town website and sort of play with the various tools, especially budget tools, so you can see how our spending actually compares to other cities and towns and to state averages. I think the town manager's big budget that comes out usually towards March or April has a great deal of comparative information on that. I really urge them, go to the town assessor's website or go to the town assessor's office and ask about various, the abatement process and how that works and how various exemptions might apply to them. And if they are applicable, apply for them. There's ways to help reduce your bills. They're fairly tight. They're operated under state law. The assessors and selectmen do not have the ability to just grant exemptions. They have to meet state laws. It's very important. They also should let people understand or what their feelings are about the debt exclusion, about the overrides. Talk to your selectmen. Buttonhole them wherever you see them. Go to the town, go to the selectmen's meeting. There's a public information at every one of those. Go to the school committee. There's public information, our public open forum to talk to them and let them know how you feel about this, and not just in a negative way, but ideas. What you think they should do. They're the elected officials of the town, and it's important. Finance committees are open meetings,
and right now the Finance Committee is actually fully staffed, is that right? Because I've talked to you at different times. I know it's one person from every precinct, is that right?
Right, actually no, unfortunately we have 3 vacancies there.
Oh, is that right?
And so in the fall, we start the process of filling those vacancies. So, we don't have a lot of people beating down the door to become Finance Committee members. But
it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. It's meeting twice a week in the evenings, pretty much throughout February and March. Like I said, starting in the fall, shoot me an email if you're interested. Either those precincts, or sometimes we can actually fill a precinct. If nobody from a precinct applies, we can fill them from somebody who is outside the precinct. So I urge you to do that. So, the key body that's going to be deciding on what goes on the ballot in June is the Board of Selectmen.
Or the Select Board.
Or the Select Board, that's right. I still been around for a long time. It's hard to change sometimes. They need to hear from you.
Well, I think that's a great summary, wonderful way for us to end this interview, because you've just described so many of the different actors and also the transparency that is at the heart of this whole process.
That's right.
You can find all the answers you need, just to remind you, by going to the town website to begin with, and then also by accessing the specific officials, all of whom can be found, contact information can be found on the town website for everybody. I can speak from personal experience. You guys are open to hearing from the population, so we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think just one more thing on the high school project. Obviously, it's a very big project. There's a tremendous amount of incorrect information that just flows around. Just because somebody says something doesn't mean it's accurate. I think the school building committee has put a tremendous amount of information out on their website, and I think people should review that, and there'll be a lot more information coming out.
That's great to hear. That is Allan Tosti, the chairman of our Finance Committee, speaking with authority, as he should. And I would recommend that you take his advice. For Allan Tosti, which again, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
I'm James Milan. This is Your Arlington Dollar. Appreciate your being here, and we'll see you next time.